The Ohio Attorney General said he could still smell it on himself hours later, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech to convey how disturbing what he saw was. Literally. He walked out of a house in Hamden, Ohio on June 30th, 2026, drove somewhere, and the smell followed him. He said it out loud at a press conference, on camera to reporters, that he could not get it off of him. I've watched that press conference more than once now, and every time I get to that specific moment, the part where he's describing the smell, there's something in how he says it that I don't think the headlines captured. He doesn't say it dramatically, he doesn't pause for effect. He says it the way someone says something they didn't plan to say, but that came out anyway because it was sitting right there, right under everything else, refusing to stay quiet. He said, "I can still smell it on me right now." And then he kept talking. Like you do when something is true and uncomfortable and you've just said it out loud in front of a room full of cameras and there's nothing to do but keep going. That's where I want to start today. Not with the timeline, not with the booking photos you've probably already seen everywhere. With that specific detail, because I think it tells you something that 100 headlines haven't about what was actually inside that house on Ohmer Road. Andy Wilson is the Ohio Attorney General. He's been in public safety and criminal justice for years. He's seen things. He said so himself at that press conference, that he and others in his field have encountered bad scenes throughout their careers. And then he said the words that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I heard them. He walked through that house, he looked through a door into that room, and he said standing next to the sheriff afterwards, trying to describe it, it reminded him of those aid commercials, the ones you see late at night sometimes, showing families in crisis overseas, covered in insects, with that particular look in their eyes that you recognize as a look of having been somewhere too long without enough of anything. He said the 12 by 12 room is where investigators focused their attention. And then he stood in front of cameras and said, "I can still smell it on me right now." We've seen a lot of coverage of this case. A lot. Since June 30th, it's been everywhere. And most of that coverage has focused on the numbers. 16 people found, 4 adults arrested, 1 house, 4 years in Vinton County, and so on. All of that matters. But I think the number that actually stops you, if you let it, is the one that doesn't get repeated as much. 12 by 12 feet. That's the room, not the house. The room, let me give you something to compare it to, because I think the number alone doesn't quite land without context. A standard one-car garage is roughly 10 by 20 feet. That's 200 square feet. The room Ohio officials said those discovered inside the home were largely confined to, for approximately 4 years, measures 144 square feet. Smaller than a one-car garage, about the same footprint as a horse stable. The sheriff of Vinton County, Cain, made that comparison directly. He said, and this is his exact public statement on record, that he has seen livestock kept in better conditions than what he found in that house. Livestock, his word, at a press conference, on the record. I want to stay with that for just a moment before we move on, because it would be easy to hear that and process it the way we process a lot of things we read in the news, as a shocking line that means things were bad, file it away, scroll to the next thing. But Cain is the sheriff of Vinton County, Ohio. He is not someone who talks to cameras every day. He is not calibrating his language for viral impact. He compared the conditions he found to livestock housing, and he said it plainly, without visible emotion. The way you say something that is simply true and that you can't say differently because there isn't a more accurate word for it. Now, I want to talk about the footage because you've probably seen it or heard about it, and I want to be straight with you about what it is and what it isn't before we get into it. In the days after the arrests, someone went into that house and filmed it. A TikTok video started circulating. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist because clearly it does and clearly people are watching it. But there are a few things you need to understand about it before you take it as the definitive visual document of what law enforcement found. First, that person entered an active crime scene. Crime scene tape was visible around the property in multiple accounts. What they did, regardless of their intention, was not authorized. Second, prosecutor William Archer, at a press conference on July 8th, said explicitly that a significant amount of material circulating online about this case is, his words, not truthful and not accurate. He said much of it has been doctored. He specifically said he was concerned about the impact of inaccurate imagery on those who were removed from the home and are now receiving care. He did not say that specifically about the TikTok video, but he was clear and deliberate in asking the public to be skeptical of what they're seeing online. Third, investigators haven't finished processing that property. Any footage filmed by an unauthorized person walking through is both potentially compromising evidence and showing a space that has already been disturbed by the original search. Now, with all of that said, I want to talk about what the footage actually shows, because there's something interesting about the gap between what the Attorney General described verbally and what appears on video, and I think that gap is actually part of the story. What the unauthorized video appears to show is a house that is, by most ordinary standards, very messy, cluttered. There are piles of things on the floor, there is debris, there is trash. The windows in some areas appear broken or missing. The overall impression is of a space that stopped being actively managed at some point, like a hoarder situation or a house that people gave up on. There are what appear to be food wrappers, there are cardboard boxes, there are items stacked along walls and in corners. What the video does not obviously show, and this is something that I've seen noted by people analyzing it closely, is the 12 by 12 room in a way that's clearly identifiable. The house appears to be mostly open plan, at least in the areas the person filming accessed, which raises a question: where is the room? Where exactly was that 12 by 12 space the Attorney General and the Sheriff were describing? That question, the gap between what investigators describe verbally and what the video shows, is actually an important one, because the unauthorized video may not have accessed the areas that matter most. The person filming may have been walking through spaces that tell a partial story, and the room that law enforcement focused on may not appear clearly in footage shot by someone who had no investigative authority and no knowledge of where to look. What the official photographs from the Associated Press do show, and these were taken outside the property and through windows on the day after the arrests by credentialed journalists present at the scene, gives you pieces of the picture. Debris visible in the yard, a high chair sitting among piles of rubbish, visible through one of the windows. A bag of rice and a can of insect killer sitting in an open window frame. A cat looking out from a side door. Multiple vehicles on the property, some filled with garbage. That's the official visual record right now. Everything else is verbal, and I keep coming back to that, because the verbal record is, in some ways, more powerful than any image. The Attorney General couldn't get the smell off himself. The Sheriff has seen livestock treated better. A first responder who drove 4 of those found in the home to the hospital during a 20-minute transport said they were frightened, quiet, blank. These are trained professionals, people who have seen things in their careers, and they are struggling to find language for what they encountered. That tells you something that footage can't. So let me try to get at the how, because I think the how is where this case actually lives. The Siders family, Gary Siders Jr., Elizabeth Siders, Gary Siders Sr., and Christina Siders, had been moving around southern Ohio for nearly 2 decades, not just Vinton County, multiple counties. Officials have confirmed this explicitly. The Ohio Attorney General said the family had been living in various parts of the state since approximately 2008. He said investigators believe they were, in his exact words, pretty good at keeping things out of investigative sight. Think about what that means for a moment. 20 years, across multiple Ohio counties, moving, relocating, resettling, and in all of that time, all those moves, all those new communities, all those different places where neighbors and local officials and state systems would have had the opportunity to notice something. Nothing rose to the level of a search warrant. Nothing produced the kind of official response that would have changed what was happening inside wherever they were living. The Vinton County Local School District, the only district covering that area, confirmed it has no enrollment records for anyone living at that address. None. This is a community of about 700 people in a county of 13,000. Small enough that you might expect things to be noticed. Nothing was noticed. Or if things were noticed, they didn't translate into official action. The Ohio Attorney General's office said the family had mostly avoided creating medical and government records. Medical records. Government records. The institutional documentation that connects people to systems, welfare, healthcare, education, and that creates the paper trail those systems use to check on people. Mostly avoided. That word mostly is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because it implies there were exceptions, moments of contact, edges where the family's existence intersected with official infrastructure, and the investigation, which has now spread beyond Vinton County to include the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the Attorney General's office, is specifically working to identify what those moments were, where they happened, and what the response was or wasn't. Former Vinton County prosecutor Aaron Payne said on 10 TV that the scope of this investigation almost certainly exceeds the capacity of a single county to manage. He said the family's history across multiple Ohio counties means witnesses may exist in other jurisdictions. Evidence may need to be gathered from other places. The investigation is not just a Vinton County investigation anymore. That breadth, the way this case extends backward in time and outward across geography, is something that most of the coverage hasn't fully reckoned with yet. What happened at 182 Ohmer Road on June 30th, 2026 is the moment the case became visible. It is not necessarily the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story may be 20 years earlier in a different Ohio county, with a different sheriff and a different set of neighbors and a different set of circumstances that either did or didn't produce the response that could have changed things. Now I want to talk about the 4 people who were arrested on June 30th, because I think how they're being characterized publicly deserves some examination. Not to defend anyone or to condemn anyone, but because the legal reality of where this case is heading is going to be shaped significantly by who each of these 4 individuals actually is. Gary Siders Jr. is 36 years old. He is the reason law enforcement was at that property on June 30th in the first place. The search warrant served that morning was not related to what investigators found inside. Court records confirmed by News Nation's local affiliate WOWK show that an arrest warrant had been issued for Gary Siders Jr. on 4 counts of misdemeanor indecent exposure tied to incidents alleged to have occurred on May 23rd, May 27th, May 29th, and May 31st, 2026. Those charges are proceeding on a separate legal track from the endangerment charges. He has a court date scheduled in connection with the indecent exposure matter. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Gary Siders Sr. is 73 years old. He is Gary Jr.'s father. He was arrested on June 30th along with the other 3 adults and charged with 16 counts of felony endangerment. His situation has developed significantly since the initial arrest. While in custody at the Southeastern Ohio Regional Jail, he fell during transport to a preliminary hearing. He was taken to Ohio Health Oblinus Hospital in Athens, where a serious underlying medical condition was discovered. Because Vinton County would have been responsible for covering his medical costs while he remained in custody, costs his attorney's motion described as potentially bankrupting the county, Judge Lena Featherolf Rogers modified his $300,000 cash bond to a recognizance bond and recommended he be transferred to a facility with more specialized care. His attorney, Dorian Baum, filed a motion in Vinton County Common Pleas Court requesting a formal competency evaluation. The motion described Gary Siders Sr. as showing significant confusion about the legal process, unable to describe the roles of participants in court proceedings, unable to describe basic facts about himself. The motion also raised the possibility of a not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect defense. The judge signed the competency order. A court-appointed evaluation is now underway or about to begin. These are 2 different legal standards, and it's worth being clear about the difference. Competency addresses whether someone currently understands the charges against them and can meaningfully participate in their own defense. The mental disease or defect question addresses their state of mind at the time the alleged conduct occurred. Both of those assessments will require expert input, and the outcome of the competency evaluation in particular will determine whether the case against Gary Siders Sr. can move forward at all in the near term. Christina Siders is 67 years old. She is Gary Sr.'s wife and Gary Jr.'s mother. She has pleaded not guilty. Her attorney has indicated they are in the early stages of reviewing the evidence. She has been less publicly visible in the coverage of this case than the other 3 defendants, and there is less public information about the specific direction of her legal defense. And then there's Elizabeth. Elizabeth Siders is 33 years old. She is Gary Jr.'s wife. Court records obtained by News Nation's local affiliate, WOWC, and reported by multiple verified outlets confirm that she married Gary Siders Jr. in Mason County, West Virginia, in March of 2008. She was 15 years old. He was 18. The marriage was legal under West Virginia law at the time, which permitted marriage at any age with parental consent. Her parents consented. Marital records indicate Elizabeth Siders' formal education ended at 8th grade. Gary Jr. completed 9th grade. Their first documented household member was born approximately 2 months after the marriage, which means Elizabeth was both 15 years old and already expecting when she signed a marriage license. Her attorney, Tommy Stolle, described her as crying and exhausted when he met with her after the arrest. He said her first question to him was not when she could get out. It was about where those under her roof were and whether they were okay. Stolle filed a motion seeking a reduction in her $300,000 bond, arguing that the financial circumstances of the family make the current bond effectively a detention order rather than a bail amount. He is also actively investigating whether Elizabeth Siders could be considered a victim within the very circumstances she now faces charges for. Not as a strategy to sidestep accountability, his language has been careful on this, but as a factual question about what her life actually looked like from the inside. And here is where this case gets genuinely complicated in a way that I don't think most of the coverage is fully reckoning with. Former lead prosecutor Tommy Pope, who prosecuted the Susan Smith case, one of the most high-profile cases in South Carolina in recent memory, spoke about Elizabeth Siders on News Nation. He said her circumstances stood out to him immediately. He described her as entering into the Siders family under what he called almost the worst of circumstances. He said it looks like a 15-year-old who, whatever was happening in her own home before the marriage, saw this as a better option. That's a former prosecutor, not a defense attorney, someone whose career was built on holding people accountable. And he used the words worst of circumstances. Attorney Tamara Holder said she sees this as another example of someone being failed by the systems that should have protected her, and then aging into circumstances that the law treats as her responsibility. Forensic nurse Rachel Fisher offered what I think is the most useful framing for how the courts will actually have to grapple with this. She said someone can have entered into circumstances without real choice and still bear responsibility for what happened to those under their care in the years that followed. She used a phrase that I want to stay with for a second: victim-offender overlap. The idea that these categories are not always mutually exclusive, that someone can be both at the same time, and that a legal system has to figure out how to weigh that without pretending it's simple. It's not simple. And then there is one more piece of this that I haven't seen covered in depth anywhere, and that I think is actually quite significant. A man came forward online, identified himself as Elizabeth Siders' brother, said they had been estranged for 15 years, said they had only recently reconnected, said that when he thought about his sister's situation, the word he reached for was indoctrinated. Not misled, not influenced badly, indoctrinated. That's not casual language. Indoctrination implies a process, something that happens systematically, something that works on a person over time in a way designed to reshape how they see things, what they accept, what they normalize, what they feel they have the right to question. He made this statement and then went quiet. But think about that timeline. If Elizabeth was 15 when she married into the Siders family in 2008, and her brother says they were estranged for 15 years, that estrangement potentially covers almost the entirety of her adult life. All of the years that this family was moving across Ohio. All of the years during which the situation in that house was developing into whatever investigators found on June 30th. During all of those years, her own family of origin was not in contact with her. And then they reconnected. And shortly after, weeks or months later, we don't know the exact timing, investigators served a warrant at 182 Ohmer Road and found what they found. I don't know what that means. I'm not saying it means anything specific, but it's a detail that has been sitting with me since I first read that post. Now let me talk about where the legal process actually stands, because I think there's been a lot of confusion about this in the coverage, and it's worth clarifying. All 4 defendants pleaded not guilty at their arraignment on July 1st. All 4 waived their preliminary hearings on July 7th. sending the case directly to a grand jury rather than having an early proceeding where defense attorneys could question witnesses and get a look at initial evidence. Vinton County Prosecutor William Archer indicated that the grand jury would likely convene in mid-July, given that grand jury hearings in Vinton County occur every other month. The grand jury will decide whether to issue indictments. If it does, the charges may be the same as what's currently filed, or they may be different. Additional charges could emerge as investigators continue working through evidence. Archer had previously said more charges were expected. A special prosecutor has been appointed from outside Vinton County, Annika Collins, the Highland County prosecutor, to handle the case given its scope and the level of national attention. That's not unusual in high-profile cases where a local prosecutor's office might face conflicts or capacity issues. The Ohio Attorney General's office is assisting. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation is involved. Former prosecutor Cain said the reach of the investigation may extend into other Ohio counties and possibly beyond, given the family's history of moving across the state for nearly 2 decades. Stolly's bond reduction motion for Elizabeth is pending. The competency evaluation of Gary Siders Sr. is proceeding. Gary Jr.'s indecent exposure case has a separate hearing date. Christina Siders' case is in early stages. Nothing has been resolved. Nothing has been decided. The grand jury hasn't met. No indictments have been issued. These are all preliminary stages of a legal process that, given the complexity of what's been alleged and the number of people involved, is going to take a long time to work through. One thing Prosecutor Archer said at the July 8th press conference that I think deserves to be the lens through which you watch the coming months of this case. He asked the public to stop circulating images and information that is not verified. He said a lot of what is out there is not truthful and not accurate. He said it matters for the case going forward, and it matters for the 16 people who were removed from that house and who are now receiving care through the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. That last part is the thing I want to make sure doesn't get buried under everything else. Those found inside 182 Ohmer Road on June 30th, 2026 are no longer inside 182 Ohmer Road. They are in care. They are being assessed. They are receiving support from professionals who are trained to provide exactly this kind of care in exactly these kinds of circumstances. The Ohio Department of Job and Family Services has confirmed temporary custody. Social workers have confirmed they have received calls from more than 60 people in the area offering donations and long-term support. It is a long road. It is not going to resolve quickly or simply. People who have spent their entire lives inside one kind of environment don't transition out of it overnight. That's true regardless of age, regardless of circumstance, regardless of what specifically happened or for how long. Recovery and stabilization, and eventually some version of a future, all of that takes time and sustained attention and resources that don't always exist in the quantities needed. But the process has started. They are not in that house anymore. There is a 12 by 12-foot room in Hamden, Ohio, that has been sealed off as an active crime scene. The Attorney General of the state walked through it on June 30th and said he could not get the smell off himself hours later. The sheriff of Vinton County said he has seen livestock treated better. The first responders described expressions that they didn't have words for. What happened in that room, and for how long, and under whose authority, and with whose knowledge, all of that is what the investigation and the grand jury and the eventual trials are going to spend months or years working through. What I know right now from verified official sources is that Andy Wilson couldn't get the smell out of his clothes on the day he walked through it, and that he was in that house for maybe an hour. 16 people were in various stages of life and development, living largely within those 144 square feet for approximately 4 years. If you want to understand what officials found in that room, not through a TikTok that someone filmed while walking through a crime scene, but through the words of the people who were legally inside doing their jobs, that's where I'd start. The Attorney General of Ohio standing at a microphone saying he can still smell it. That's the document. Subscribe to Unsolved Archive for every verified development in this case as it moves through the grand jury and into trial proceedings. We will be here for every step of what is, by any measure, one of the most significant cases in Ohio in years. Hit the notification bell. And share this video if you think this story deserves more careful attention than it's getting, because I think it does.